But now I see a trend again where red dot mounts are getting huge.
Yep.
So what is the current state of red dot mounts, and what are your thoughts on that?
That is your current state of options.
Let's test some of that ADM knowledge then. Let's talk scope mounts. So want to tell a quick story. So my very first optic was like a secondhand red dot, because this was years and years ago, and I didn't have a ton of money, and optics were expensive,
Yep.
and there wasn't necessarily the players that were in the market, and so I was like, oh yeah, well, red dot, I can use that for my defensive gun that I also shoot 3-gun with, and it'll be good enough for limited division. And man, I had the worst time with that thing, and I was convinced the optic was broken. I was convinced the rifle was messed up, went through different barrels and stuff like that. And what it was is I'm thinking it is aim point comp M2, I believe. And so it had like the tension screw on there that you twist and then it clicks, twist, then it clicks. And that thing would back off, and it ended up being that that it would back off and then it would loosen up. And so then your zero obviously gets all messed up. And so when you shoot past, 80 yards, you'd hit nothing. And so I recognize that I spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars just throwing lead down range, being frustrated, looking like an idiot, which again, that's that ego portion, right? And not being able to hit the targets or complete stages and timing out and stuff like that because of a freaking scope mount. So that really set in my mind that is one of the most important things that I can get right when I'm talking about like a rifle / optics package. And it just solidified it in my head. So I hope people listen to that story and take it away so they don't have to live through it either. Yeah. But man,
it's a very, very common one. I mean, myself as well. I mean, when I first started in, the hunting side of it, it was save up money and that stuff, buy yourself this really nice Remington 700, spend $800 or $900 for this nice bolt action that you've been waiting for the last couple of years or whatever. You get that and you blow all your money on that. So then you go to, buy the Walmart Tasco special, bubble pack, scope. Yeah, it comes with the rings and everything, for $89 to throw on there. You can't figure out why it doesn't work. I mean, it's a whole package. Everything works together. I mean, your package is only going to be as strong as the weakest link. And it's real easy to kind of gloss over the non-glamorous parts, whether that be the scope or the mount or whatever it is. Yeah. Or even the ammunition. Even if you spend all the good money on all the other parts, you feed it the cheapest ammunition that you can buy, you're going to get that results.
Yeah, that Remington 700 story reminds me, I had a friend, Seth, that I brought out to the range, and he was sighting in his elk hunting rifle, and finally, after shooting a box and not being able to zero it, he's like, hey, take a look at this. And I just touched the mount and you could feel the nuts rattling. I'm like, bro, like this thing's been loosening up this whole time. Yep. And yeah, man, it's super common. Yeah.
So all preparation and, getting the whole system to work together.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So ADM makes a ton of different scope mounts. I use ADM scope mounts now on absolutely everything that I have. And I love them because I never think about them. And it's one of those things where it's like set it and forget it kind of thing. Yep. And I never have to consider like, is it holding me back? Is there something wrong or anything? So I prefer to think about my stage plan rather than my gear. And that has really helped me over the years for sure. So I guess let's talk like TAC ops or open real quick for like LPVOs. Yep. So ADM makes several different kinds of scope mounts, and I always see like a debate of what's better or what's worse, etc. So I know that there's different ways to split the ring. It can either be like split vertical if you're watching on the YouTube, I'm doing it here, or it can be split horizontal if you're watching on YouTube, I'm doing it here. And then there's quick release versus torque directly to the receiver, cantilever that is like an inch forward, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever it is. Scope heights. So there's a lot to deal with when you're looking at a scope. And I find that the more people I talk to, the more personal that it gets. So do you have like a guide or a way you would tell people to choose their scope mount?
Yeah, so what we can do is I've got several different mounts here set out, so we can kind of go through and explain the differences between them, and then kind of how that relates to how your body and your shooting style is going to interface with your gun.
Okay.
Because when we're getting into the equipment side of it, one of the things I try and frequently tell, especially newer people, because they seem to be the most gullible at doing this, is you're never going to be able to spend money and buy trinkets that are going to get you to finish higher. I mean, that's just, I was guilty of it too. I mean, you see whatever you're going to see on Instagram or wherever, and you want to spend the money because that's going to make me shoot better. It's probably not.
I wish that were the case.
Yep. The one place where you are going to be good spending money is to get equipment that's reliable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it needs to be reliable and consistent. So it needs to go bang every time, function. And then whether it be your optic mounts, your optics, or whatever, they need to be able to perform at a position or a level that they're going to be consistent. Because if you lose the consistency in any of those, like you were talking about with that scope mount being loose or anything like that, everything else you put into it, all the other practice and all that stuff's going to be a waste.
Yep.
So you need to spend the money, and it doesn't have to be premium, but you need to make sure you get quality gear that's going to be reliable and function. And from there, everything's going to be your personal performance to get you to gain the places. So part of that's going to be setting up your rifle so it best fits you in your shooting style. Because everybody's body is a little bit different, and everybody, carries the gun, shoulders the gun, puts their head in a different place. And a lot of times that comes down to what they were originally taught and kind of what's now ingrained in their brain. Me, I'm a taller person, so you would think I'd be the one that'd be shooting the collapsible stock with it extended all the way out and all that kind of stuff. It was ingrained to me when I started shooting, nose to the charging handle. So that's still the way I shoot. So I shoot a collapsible stock all the way closed. Mm-hmm. So with me having my eye that far forward, I need to have a lot of cantilever, built into the optic mount to be able to give me the proper eye relief. Otherwise, I'm kind of rubbernecking and pulling my head back, which is a uncomfortable position and not natural for me. So it adds time and inconsistencies into my performance when I go up and shoot on the clock. Okay. So we want to make sure we get your rifle set up so it fits your shooting. So you had mentioned cantilever. So what we're talking about with cantilever is going to be when you have an optic mount for the highest consistency of accuracy. You want to have your optic mount just attached to the receiver and the receiver only. You don't want to have part of your optic mounted to the handguard due to the fact that can take some flex. The barrel with the barrel nut is mounted directly to the receiver, so you want to have your optic attached just to the receiver. So this scope mount right here is going to have a 2-inch offset. So I can have this base section attached to the receiver, but it's allowing me to move the scope 2 inches forward to allow for that proper eye relief, back here. We have other scope mounts that are going to have even farther. Let's see, I don't think I have. Oh, here's one. So like this one here is going to be a full 3 inches.
Oh, wow.
So you can see the difference in the offset. So you'll have 2 inches, 3 inches, and then obviously a type of a scope mount that will have 0 offset. So a lot of it's going to be based on how you personally set your rifle up, how you set the stock up, where you actually put your cheek to have your eye placement. So you want to have your natural shooting position and then adjust the optic to fit you so you can shoot in a consistent, repeatable position that's comfortable for you. So me personally, I use this, what we call the Recon X. So it has that 3 inches of forward offset because I shoot with my nose touching the charging handle. So to get that proper eye relief behind the optic, mm-hmm. I need to push the whole optic body farther forward. And on this one here, you were kind of talking about having the vertically or the horizontally split rings.
Yeah.
So this one here is going to be our Recon mount. This one here will be a Delta mount. So they're both going to be a 2-inch offset. These specific mounts here are both the 1.5 inches tall, so kind of what's considered a standard height. But the difference between them is going to be how the ring and the base unit attach to the rifle and hold the scope in its position. So with the vertically split rings, you're going to have a base unit that's going to attach to your rifle. And then from there, you're going to have a set of rings that are going to attach to that to hold the optic to it. So there are some advantages to this because this obviously is a lighter unit. It allows you, if say this year 30 millimeters the hot ring size or optic tube size. Next year somebody comes out with something new that 41 millimeters, a new hot scope to have. Instead of having to spend $200 on an entire new scope mount, you can buy just a new ring set and swap it out so you can use the same base with a different ring set on top of it to change that out. So that's one advantage to that. The other one is the weight. One key feature with any of these ones that have the vertically split rings is going to be how you mount your optic in there. So the traditional way of mounting optics is you're going to put them in there, you'll set your optic in, level it, you'll have your 4 screws that kind of come down in there to hold everything in, to clamp it into place. You'll do that kind of X pattern to even it out to make everything nice and level and have an even gap on each side. With a vertically split ring, whether it's ours or any other manufacturer that has the rings that split like that, you cannot set the optic up that way. What you have to do is you put the rings in, set your optic in there, and then you have to fully torque the bottom 2 screws that clamp the ring halves to the base. You have to fully torque those 2 in before you do any torquing or any tensioning at all for the top ones that clamp the optic in there, rotationally. If you kind of evenly space them, you can have a small gap between the ring and the base, which can allow some movement, which will take away some of your accuracy potential. So you want to fully torque down the bottom 2 rings, lock those ring halves to the base, so you have that solid, unit holding the optic in. Then you level your optic, get it set forward and back where you want it, get your crosshairs leveled, and then you clamp and hold the optic into the scope mount with the top 2. That keeps the rings and the base attached solid, so there's no slight movement in there at all. It locks everything in. It'll give you the most accuracy potential out of the optic in the mount system.
Interesting. Okay, so that I need to go remount my scope, and then
it's in the directions, but everybody skips it.
No, for sure. I'm only kidding on that. But so that I think is interesting, and it's definitely something that is counterintuitive, and it is one of those read the instructions sort of things. But yep. I guess like in like the learning space or in the knowledge transfer, I've always seen like you only want vertical split or you only want horizontal split, and I guess like if you're in the horizontal split camp, would that be considered like why someone would say
Correct.
that is like they've just been mounting it wrong or something like that?
Yep. That can cause a lot of the issues that will come up with this type of a scope mount. A lot of it comes back to that improper setup and the improper use of it. Otherwise, I mean, this is a very strong scope mount, very repeatable, very consistent. The Recon series is probably 70% of our optics mounts that are sold, even though we do offer the other one. So it's a very capable, very functional, very repeatable and consistent scope mounting system. But those are a couple of intricacies that go with any optic mounting system that uses that vertically split ring.
Gotcha.
So then going to the more traditional horizontally split one, so the advantage you're going to have with that, this base here doesn't have the rings in it right now, it would be the same type of a base as this one here, is that you have the part that attaches to the rifle and the lower half of the ring are all machined out of the same billet aluminum. So they are one solid piece from the attachment with the rifle rail to holding the lower half of the optic tube itself. And then you have the traditional horizontally cut ring caps. So you'll set this on there, level your reticle, whichever technique you want to use for leveling the reticle. And then you'll go through and do your normal torque down of the cap here. You do that normal X pattern that everybody's used to. So the unit here is going to be much more solid. It's heavier, but it will have more strength potential and more potential for that consistent accuracy under extreme conditions due to the fact that it is made out of one piece from the section that holds the optic tube to the section that actually attaches to the rifle.
Got it. What is the weight difference? Do you know off the top of your head, or can you say like approximately?
I don't remember exactly what they are for ounces, ounce to ounce. But you are talking a noticeable difference when you just hold the mounts side by side. So I would guess probably an ounce. So it's noticeable when you just hold them side by side and you're just comparing these two units. Now, if you have a completely set up rifle with a 30-round magazine in it that's weighing 9.5 pounds, and I put one up to my shoulder with one mount and one up the other shoulder with the other mount, am I really going to be able to feel the difference? No.
Yeah. I had that conversation recently with bolt carriers. We were like weighing bolt carriers, and we got down to like 0.7 ounces, or not 0.7 ounces, 7 ounces. No, wait, I have that wrong. I don't know. Anyway, the difference was negligible. It was 0.7 ounces, right? And so you could feel it, and so we like wrapped them in paper towels and like, okay, well, which one's which? Did the switch around sort of thing, and you could feel which one it was. But I did the same thing as you did. I argued like, well, okay, well, and it's in the rifle, you're not gonna be able to tell. Yeah. So yeah,
and the only thing different with the bolt carrier is it's going to affect the speed.
Yeah, it's moving, right?
Yeah,
interesting. All right, so the so is that basically like personal preference, or do you have like a recommendation on that? You said set like 70% or the vertical split. Doesn't matter.
So I prefer the Delta series. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is my personal preference because it is just rock solid. There's really nothing that you can do. You can try and get this thing to fail, and you're really not going to be able to. So having said that, though, my personal 3-gun rifle runs a recon.
Oh, okay.
And that thing gets beat up all over the place constantly, and I don't have a concern or a worry about having point of impact shifts, because we know how well we treat those rifles, and you've probably seen me throw things around, and Madeline learned from me, and she's already broke one of her guns in half doing it. So
yeah, she's notorious for breaking guns, like tossing them like she's mad at them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I potentially this is stronger, and we'll be able to maintain zero better and all that kind of stuff. But having said that, like I said, on my personal 3-gun rifle, which is probably the one that I use the most and probably have the most at stake with, whether it be prize table or just match finish, or just the fact that I'm traveling from Wisconsin to North Carolina or to Texas or whatever, and have a lot riding on the 3 days I'm going to be using that. I want it to be bulletproof.
Yeah.
I run a recon on that one, so it's not that isn't a capable scope mode.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I have a couple of each, and I believe the recon is what I use on my 3-gun rifle, and then I think the Delta is what I have on my 6.5 Creedmoor. And yeah, I mean they both work, they both hold zero, so good to go.
Yeah, and what you just brought there with the 6.5 Creedmoor, I mean, the Delta line, our original Delta, I mean, one that has the NSN number and everything else on it, I mean, that was originally designed to work with the SCAR Heavy 308, because that is such a wicked recoil impulse on that. So that's what this mount was designed for. So it is definitely overbuilt. And, my 308 platforms, I do run the Deltas on.
Yeah.
It's just not that you're going to really cause a recon to fail or break or anything like that, but, they are built for the extra recoil impulse and the extra weight in the cycle. And so I do run those on my 308s.
Yeah. Good to know. Yeah. I feel like the heavier platform probably would have, I mean, it obviously has more recoil, so probably would translate a lot more shock to it. Yeah. And then I have the I guess the zero offset, the zero cantilever on mine, because I use a PRS stock, which is much longer than what I typically shoot for 3-gun. So the scope has to be closer, or I guess farther back on the receiver.
Yep, I do the same thing on my large frames, because the upper receiver itself is longer, so you can move the whole mount a little bit farther forward. And I normally shoot, like you said, with a PRS stock. I do have a couple that have a carbine stock, but on the large frames, I normally don't have to use a cantilever.
Got it. Okay. So I guess that's how you choose like cantilever. We talked about the splits. So then I guess quick release versus like torqued. I don't know what you would say, just like normal fasteners.
Yep. Yeah. So probably 95% of all our mounts, I mean, it's one of the things we're known for and have one of our original patents for, is going to be our QD lever system. So with our lever system, you have 2 locking levers. They have a release lever inside of them as well, so they can't just pop open. On the other side of it, for the adjusting for the tension, we have a nut that drops inside of a recessed cutout. I don't know if you'll see it on that one, but you can see on here that it has a recessed cutout in there that the nut actually drops into. So there is no way that this system can vibrate loose. I mean, a lot of times it's kind of traditional where you do the paint pen marks on your optic mounts and that stuff, so you can see if your nuts are starting to vibrate loose on them or having to lock them in or anything like that. With this, you physically do not have to do that, because to adjust it, you have to push it, pop that nut out of the recessed pocket, then you can tighten or loosen it to fit your rail, and then it drops back in that pocket. So once it's locked in, it physically cannot open, and the nut itself cannot vibrate loose. So it does have some advantages with that. It does add a touch more weight to it. Some people actually do use the QD function. Me, I personally don't use the QD function on them. I'm not popping my optics on and off very often at all. But it is an option there if you wanted to do that. But I do still use the QD due to the fact that it's either on there or it's off. We do offer a traditional type of a nut and bolt. We have one that we call the GI nut. Let's see if I hold that closer, we can see it or not. So you can see the nut on that one. It also has pre-drilled holes in it. So the nut on one side of the bolt will still drop into that recess. So that's physically, limited from being able to vibrate loose. The nut on the other side, you use a normal torque wrench like you would any other scope mount. You torque it down. And then with our GI bolt, this is set up so it's pre-drilled for safety wire, because there are some military units or contracts that require that type of a mounting system, and they require that it be safety wired on to prevent any loosening, or so that if the wire is broken, you know that you need to service the unit or recheck it prior to duty use. So that system is set up for that. We do have some people that just prefer that traditional style, so we do have that available.
Yeah. Yeah. I typically, or I guess traditionally, I was like the bolt guy, and, just kind of torqued it and forgot about it. But then my specific use case, which is, I create a lot of content, like I was constantly transferring scopes over to stuff. And so once I got the QD mounts, it made life much, much easier. And I'm constantly changing guns and putting scopes on stuff for photos, videos, whatever it is, different matches and stuff. So it is helpful in that realm.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah. And then that way, if you're one of those guys that has multiple guns but can't afford a lot of glass, you can move it all over too.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So let's talk scope height. So this is what got me into ADM scope mounts. So you actually reached out because you're listening to the podcast, and we were talking about scope height. And I don't even recall who I was talking to at the time. This is years ago. But we were talking about the difference between like the 1.5 inch scope mount versus 193, which is kind of was the hotness at the time, and seems like it currently still is. And then it's getting even worse with like red dots in the tactical game. I can't tell what's a joke and what's serious anymore. So what's the deal with scope height? Like, how does that come into play?
Okay, so I've got 3 different options here. These are all going to be the Recons. So we have the Recon H, which is the 193. So starting a few years ago, that you probably heard 193 everywhere. That was kind of the new hotness. Our standard one, which is the 150, which is kind of what's been considered industry standard pretty much forever. And then what we have here is a Recon M, or medium. So that falls right in between the two. So this could be a baseline of a 1.7 height. So what started the 193, I can grab one of my personal guns here, is trying to get a low power variable optic that will have the objective or field of view clear a laser aiming device that's mounted onto the rifle. So having a 1.5 will bring the scope, down here. I mean, you can move the laser forward. So some people put them all the way up in front. Kind of depends on your rifle setup. But you'll still see some of that optic or some of the laser body, obscuring the lower portion of your, field of view when you have it down at 1x. So that was kind of the impetus behind raising up the optics, is to get them up and over this type of an aiming unit. What was discovered, at least my understanding is how it came about, is what was discovered with that, kind of as a secondary advantage, was that you had a more heads-up shooting position when you're running the rifle, which instead of having to tip your head over, you're always trying to coach people to bring the rifle to your eye. not bring your eye down to it and put you into an uncomfortable position, because under stress, you're going to forget to do that. You're going to be looking over the top of your sights, or it's going to add time into the whole equation of getting your first accurate round on target. So by having the optic itself higher, you're bringing the optic up closer to your eye and having to do less conforming your body to the gun and conforming the gun more to your body. It also helps when you're moving. So for free gun or tactical, I mean, a lot of your moving you try to do, or a lot of your shooting you try to do while moving. So having your head more erect and vertical helps with your peripheral vision. It also helps with your equilibrium, because that's how your body walks around all day long. With your head upright, you don't walk around with your head tipped to the side like this or back. So you have, a more natural way of moving around obstacles and kind of interpreting your environment at the same time. So that was kind of the follow-up benefits for it, is allowing that. Also, if you're shooting with helmets or earmuffs, having your optic up a little bit higher where you can't push your head down if you really try to push it down like that, where you have physical obstacles with earmuffs or helmets preventing you from doing that. So the taller optic also helps in that realm.
Okay. Well, I guess that makes complete and total sense then. Clearing the laser aiming device, and then just becomes the benefit of a more upright shooting position. So I would say that, typically I look at myself as like, I'm pretty like go with the flow, malleable, and just work around the weapon, and but I have noticed like a benefit of like a super adjustable stock, a scope height that's much higher, and it does get more comfortable. So the more time you spend on it, the more you seem to enjoy it. And I've also noticed that my pistol shooting position has become more upright as well, because I'm not stuck in the like head down sort of thing where I would typically just translate that over from rifle to pistol, pistol to rifle, etc.
Yep, I would agree with that. But the only negative you hear with the taller ones, depending on your face makeup, is you don't have that real solid cheek weld onto the stock. It'd be a little bit farther down on the chin, and you're not pushed into it. So when you're shooting dynamic and moving, that's not really a noticeable issue. But when you're trying to shoot precision or long range, not having that solid, mounting point can affect that a little bit, or throw a little extra, equation into when you're trying to build your position. And also when you're shooting prone, having the optic up higher. Some people, again, depending on their body position, how they're shooting the gun, and how their body makeup is it can add a little bit more of an angle to your neck, where it makes it a little bit less comfortable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, if that is something you're running into, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think like a PRS Lite or one of the dissonant arm stocks that has the adjustable cheek riser can help out with that, because then it'll help you get that proper cheek weld. The other thing I've noticed in using a higher scope mount is when I go prone and I shoot tac ops, so I can't have a bipod. So now I need a higher magazine to make it comfortable for me to shoot, where typically a 30 rounder is perfect for me and my body. But now I'm looking at like a 35 or a 40 is much more comfortable. And then that mitigates that neck crane you're talking about.
Yep. Because that's bringing your shoulders and everything up higher. So you're kind of, tipping up to your back and spine is in more of or closer to an erect position.
Yeah. Yeah. You're using more of your body to make that angle up instead of just cranking your neck back.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So then, okay, I messed around with the 193 for a couple of years, and I've kind of just gotten like used to it, and I like it now. When I go back to red dots, though, now you're going back to that 1.5 inch height. That's the typical AR height, which I believe is because that's what like the iron sights were, like the classic A post, right?
Yep, what they call co-witness is kind of like the industry standard. So on a traditional, mil spec, with a fixed, front sight post, it's the height that dot would be at to co-witness it, looking through your front and rear irons. The dot would be centered in that, and that would be in the center of the field of view through the optic.
Yeah. Okay. But now I see a trend again where red dots mounts are getting huge, and I almost like forgot that changing a mount was a thing with red dots until they just started getting higher and higher and higher.
Yep.
And so what is the current state of red dot mounts, and what are your thoughts on that?
That is your current state of options.
Is this all for the same one?
Yep. I mean, these will all fit the T1 footprint. So you have as low as physically possible. You know, these all are going to be our QD mounts. So you have as low as physically possible. That's frequently used if somebody wants to put a QD on something like a AK platform or something like that that has the rail itself, you know, where the mounting point is already quite a bit above the stock. Also like an MP5 or a shotgun or something like that where they want a QD. So that's where we typically see that one going. The next one in line is going to be the co-witness, which you're talking about, that 1.5. So mounting an optic on here should put, if you're running backup irons, should put the line of sight for your backup irons right through the center of the optic window, and then you can adjust the, you know, the aiming point itself in there to match the bullet impact, but it should be dead center in the optic window. So that was the first start of, you know, using red dots. It was going to be that co-witness type of a mount.
Mm-hmm.
As things progressed from there, people wanted to not have their fixed irons, because that kind of came about when a lot of guns still had that fixed A post. You know, it wasn't like all flip up, flip down. So when you're using that, you know, a good portion of your field of view of having this nice optic to look through was being blocked by that chunk of steel. So the next kind of transition was would be what they call lower third, 1/3. So now move the center of the optic window up above the iron sights, but you could still see the iron sights, but that lower 1/3 indicates that, you know, it should ideally be in the lower quadrant of your optic window. So you're still getting, you know, 2/3 to 3/4 of your optic field of view above the irons unobstructed. So then next step from that is going to be following that same, because 193 became the magic number in the industry. So that also followed over to red dots. So this brings that height up to 193, because following that head position while, you know, standing, shooting, moving, and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the next transition with that, to follow that. And then what's become also popular, I mean, we've had this, what we call our NV or night vision mount. We've actually had this for quite a while. It hasn't really been popular with civilian market until, you know, semi recently. That was designed with a military unit that was trying to get away from, traditionally with night vision, you know, what the traditional way of aiming was with infrared laser. So basically you had a red dot, but it was only visible through night vision. You weren't using the actual sight to look through. So, which is perfectly acceptable until you start going peer on peer. So when you have other people that have night vision, you know, running around with your infrared illuminators on and lasers on all the time isn't the most stealthful that you're trying to be at night. So then they started to put some credence behind the ability to be able to do what they call passive aiming with your night vision. So you're using your night vision tubes, helmet mounted tubes, but instead of using the IR illuminators and IR lasers to, you know, designate your impact point, you're actually looking through an optic. And have night vision settings on that optic so that you can look through there and aim through your night vision tubes, you know, through that optic, and be able to accurately engage a target without putting out any IR signature for somebody else with infrared to be able to see. So the extra height of that allows you, when you have tubes mounted to your helmet, to be able to get behind it, because with all the extra gear you have on, you can't get your normal head down onto the stock to get that, you know, line of sight to go at the lower heights of a traditional red dot. So that's why that is up so high, is to be able to allow you to look through it with your night vision tubes. For law enforcement, it also became very kind of relevant, even before a lot of law enforcement teams started using night vision on a regular basis. Gas and gas masks were a very common entry item. When you're shooting with gas masks on, it's impossible to get a normal shoulder well to use normal height sights. So it was common there. You would basically tip the gun, you know, 90 degrees to the left and kind of push it out in front of your shoulder, and then hold the optics out in front and look through it that way, with never even having any kind of a shoulder mounting point for the rifle. With this taller 233 height that's used for night vision, it also allows you to use gas masks and have an actual, you know, buttstock in your shoulder, put your head down, it hits the gas mask, but you can still see through the optic and do a normal shooting and normal aiming technique. So that's kind of where the transition has gone with the red dots and the popularity for being super tall, especially with the popularity of night vision now in the civilian market.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, like you can do, hog hunting in, that's super popular, right? Because eradication is a thing. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that is one right there on one of my night vision SBR PD demo guns that I have. And then one thing that we added to our night vision mount, I mean, I wish I could say I was the guy that was smart enough to came up with the idea, but it was, like I said, we've had this mount out for quite a while. We had a guy from the 75th group just give us a random question last year as to why can't you set that up so you can use your iron sights underneath it? And there really wasn't a reason why we couldn't. So you can kind of see in there that we now have a hole ported in there. So that was originally, it was going to be designed just to be a pass-through. So it'd be a view window to be able to use, backup irons, front and rear underneath through that. Changed the location a little bit and size like 3 different times trying to work it out. So now it can actually function as the rear peak. You can use it with you can use it with the rear actual backup iron sight if you want to, or you have it set up there and it will function just like a rear peep sight with the front.
That's crazy. So the optic mount is actually backup sight now. That's awesome.
Yep. You can kind of see it that direction. You can kind of see the backup iron in front of the laser, and then you can see the viewport that acts just like the rear peep.
Wow. I didn't know that was a thing. That's really cool.
Yeah, like I said, I wish I could have thought of that simple thing myself, but
yeah, no joke, right? That's pretty cool. So I guess then beyond the special use cases of like gas mask and night vision, then like the high mount is like a personal preference, or is it like a flex of I shoot night vision, or is it just like the new products? So that's what I'm seeing.
The 193 height, I can see being, non-night vision and all that kind of stuff, having the advantage of having the upright head. I mean, I can see an advantage of that. The taller, the true night vision ones, the 233s and that kind of a thing, those are more of a hindrance shooting when you don't have all the extra stuff going on. I mean, they can be shot. I mean, and most of the guns are probably shot 90% of the time without night vision being active.
Yeah.
But you have the capability to function the gun the same way when you're running with night vision. So for those, it's, I guess if you have somebody that has one of those mounts and doesn't have night vision, isn't shooting that way, it's probably just I'm trying to look cool. It'd be my guess.
I saw it on the gram.
It's really not a function enhancing feature, at least not in my book, unless you have the capability of shooting night vision or with a gas mask.
Okay, got it. Do you guys see any demand for anything higher than that? Are we just gonna keep going?
Not that I'm aware of right now. I mean, we get random customer requests for pretty much everything under the sun, higher, taller, left or right, or anything in between. But far as being a functional use of something taller than that, not that I can see. But
okay.
I wouldn't have seen that either in the long-term thing of 20 years ago either. So
yeah, that's true.
Because literally, when I first started, my first AR that I carried on duty was a fixed carry handle, and you had all the red dots that you could clamp onto the top of that, and those were all some people thought they were the coolest thing on earth, and other people kind of ripped on them because it was so tall and you couldn't get a cheek weld. I mean, literally those ones that were clamping on top of a carry handle before are exactly what this is now.
That's what I was thinking.
It's kind of gone full circle.
Time is a flat circle, man, and we just keep repeating ourselves.
Yep.
Well, okay, so one last question on height, and then I want to talk about difference in material. So I forgot about this in the scope portion, but okay, so we're talking about like scope height, right? So in any ballistics application, they ask like scope height over bore. Is there a like benefit or detriment? I don't know what the opposite of that is, to having like a higher scope mount, specifically again for like magnified scopes. Does that hurt you, or do you just need to make sure that number is correct and then use math to overcome it?
Primarily, you just need to know that it's correct and know the dope that you have for your rifle at different distances to compensate for that. Okay. You will have a greater change over distance by having a larger or higher number for the scope over bore. Because basically your zero, you have your line of sight where the optic is.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have this one that's, a taller one, my line of sight, goes straight through there, never changes. Light does not drop with gravity or anything like that. So you're going to have your line of sight that's going to start up there. Basically what you're doing when you're zeroing is your bore, however far below that is, you're picking a distance where those two are going to meet up, and that's going to be your point of impact and point of aim.
Mm-hmm.
So the larger the difference those start at, whatever distance you pick that they're going to meet at is going to have a greater effect. Say you use a 50-yard zero. And let's just say I have, my scope is 1.5 inches above my line of bore. Maybe that's small for an AR, but let's just say it's 1.5 inches above my bore. I've only got 1.5 inches to come up, so it's not a really drastic angle that I'm making that, changing the angle of my barrel to meet that line of sight at 50 yards. But now if I've got 2.5 inches above my bore, now I have to make a more significant angle that I'm aiming the barrel up to make those meet again at 50 yards because it started out higher.
Mm-hmm.
So where the negative comes from that is after you hit that initial meetup point, it's that steeper angle is going to carry that bullet higher above your line of sight before gravity affects it and pulls it back down. So instead of having, say, at 150 yards, your bullet's now going to be 1.7 inches above. It's could be 2.5 inches above. I mean, I'm just pulling those numbers out of the air, not out of math that I've memorized. But that's where the negative would become of having your scope center being higher above your bore center. Is you have to have a steeper angle to have your line of sight and the bullet travel meet, so they can have a further negative effect of that steep angle of having a rise higher above it before gravity pulls it back down.
Got it. Now, is that something that can just be overcome with math and dope, or is that a concern you should always worry about?
As long as you know your dope and your rifle setup, it's not a concern. At least not for me anyways, because I would set the rifle up so that I'm comfortable shooting it and in my shooting positions. And if that means I have a 193 scope height, so be it. And I'm going to learn the data for that rifle with that scope mount and that ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's more comfortable for me at a 1.5, I'm going to learn that rifle data is going to be developed with that. So it's not like it's a huge night or day difference, like you're going to have a 12-inch difference of impact, between the two, where it's, a huge noticeable thing. It will be a slight noticeable thing, but it's not going to be any different than if you are shooting 77 grain ammo compared to 69 grain ammo.
I gotcha. Okay, cool. So, then last question I have on mounts then is materials. So I know you guys do like aluminum and titanium. Other than like weight, is there any benefit toward one or the other?
Titanium has a advantage in thermal change because aluminum has a pretty good change by temperature, where titanium has a very, very minimal compared to aluminum change. So if you have your titanium, at 90 degrees and then you have it at say 20 below, the amount of change in that structure is going to be very minimal compared to the change that would be in aluminum. So that would be the one primary advantage of it. 99% of the mounts we sell are aluminum due to cost and a few other things. Titanium we're kind of stepping away from because the titanium products that we were using were injected titanium rather than a machine, because the machining costs for machining stuff out of titanium is ridiculous, both in tool wear, tool time, how long it actually takes to run in the machine, and then the raw materials, where if it's metal injected and then, just finished machined, for the tolerance, contact surfaces. That's the process that we were using. There just has not been the customer interest in it to sustain the manufacturing of it. So that's probably going to be going away. Gotcha.
Okay. So buy now if you need it. That's what I heard.
Yep. Yeah. If you really want the titanium, I mean, it is a cool process, very cool design because the engineering behind it can be done very different than it can be done with other metals.
Yeah.
So it has some uniqueness with that, but we haven't seen the customer demand for it, be what we thought it might be. So it's going to be going away.
So that's got to be a cost thing, right? Because like, if cost were equal, people would just go like, yeah, I want the lighter thing. And then obviously titanium is cooler than aluminum. But yeah, it has to be the cost thing. I wonder if like that'll change with 3D printing because years again, I left Lockheed a long time ago, but when I was there, we were just getting into like 3D titanium printing and then finish machining from there. And from what I've seen, like it's advanced quite a bit. But I wonder if that'll change in the future, or if that'll just always be that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that Huxworks Safety, they have a 3D titanium printed suppressor now.
Yeah. That's, man, what a time to be alive.
Yep.
it's like the Star Trek replicators, like, make me a suppressor.
Yep.
All right, Tom, anything we missed on scope mounts, optics mounts that we want to talk about?
I guess one other thing that we do offer in a large number of our mounts is going to be MOA built into the mount.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I always forget that.
So, this mount right here,
what that is for someone who doesn't know.
So both our Recon and our Delta line will offer options where you can get MOA added in. The Recon line will give you the greatest options. In the Delta line, we offer 20 and 30 MOA. In the Recon line, we do 20, 30, 40, and 100 MOA.
Whoa.
If you're shooting really long range. So what the MOA does is that if you're consistently going to be shooting at longer distances, we all know about getting your data and dialing your scope up, to match whatever the drop is for your bullet at a certain distance. As you get out there to the longer distances, even if you haven't exceeded the ability of your scope's mechanical ability to dial on the dope, you're still pushing that inner erector tube to the very edges of the outer containment tube. So if you would have, say, had 50 MOA of windage previously when you were centered up in that tube, now you dialed it so you're like right at the ragged edge of not having enough elevation to continue dialing anymore. If you're shooting 800 yards or however far it is with your gun, you've now lost the ability to dial windage to any degree. You may only have 10 MOA of windage to dial now instead of the 50, due to the fact that the tube inside of the tube, instead of being centered and having that full movement, is now pushed all the way to one edge and can only move a little bit before it hits the edge and you run out of travel for the adjustments.
Oh, interesting.
So that's one of the big advantages of it.
That makes total sense. I hadn't thought about that specific case, right? Like you always think about like it being in the center.
Yep.
Huh.
Yeah. So the advantage of that is being able to get farther distance while still dialing out of your scope without having to use holdover. So that's the big advantage of it. Negative of it is depending on what MOA you get, you may not be able to have enough elevation in your scope adjusting turrets to be able to zero at a close distance. Mm-hmm. Say you normally do 100 yards zero for your rifle. If you have a 20 MOA base, you 99% chance you're still going to be able to get that 100 yard zero as long as everything else is lined up. If you start going to like a 40 MOA base, you got about an 80% chance, depending on your scope, because every scope's got a different amount of elevation into it, that you will not be able to get a 100 yard zero. You're always going to be shooting high. But if you're putting a 40 or higher MOA base onto a rifle, you're probably going to have like a 600 yard zero on it or something like that anyways.
Gotcha. Okay. So the MOA built into the scope, the scope mount, starts you off with elevation for long distance shooting and then gives you more adjustability, or gives you the full range of adjustability in your scope at farther distances. Is that right? Is that about right?
Yep.
Okay.
So basically if your scope was, say, pre-zeroed for your rifle, that it was dead zero at 100 yards, and now you were able to change them out, nothing else changed on there, but we put a 20 MOA base on that.
Mm-hmm.
your rifle is now going to be hitting 20 MOA high. So you basically be the equivalent of about 20 inches high at 100 without doing any scope adjustments. So now you would have to adjust your scope down that 20 MOA to get it to 0 at 100. So that gives you that extra 20 minutes of elevation that you can dial into your scope to adjust for longer distances out.
Gotcha. Okay. And so I guess then if you're considering buying a scope mount for long range, at what distances would you typically shoot where that would be a necessity? Is there like a rule of thumb on that?
Generally, we tell people if you're going to try and shoot over 800 yards on a regular basis, it's not a bad idea to have MOA built in. And
Gotcha.
again, it really depends on the optic that you put on there. Because some of the newer optics that are made for long range, they've significantly increased the amount of elevation that you can dial into them. So some of those optics you won't need MOA added in, as early as you would with some of the more traditional or lower, budget line optics. But also with those high-end ones, it allows you to throw that 40 MOA on there and potentially still get 100 yard 0.
Got it. Okay.
It's kind of a balancing act between where you want to dial and where you want to start adding holdovers into the reticle, and what you need for your minimum distance of the zeroing capability.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've definitely shot a match where I've maxed out the dial and then had to hold after that. So yeah, that does happen for sure.
Yeah. And I had one where 22 long rifle that I was setting up for, kind of longer range shooting. I had put a 30 MOA base on that, and with the optic that I had on there, because with the 22 long rifle stuff, you get some long distance stuff, but you still have to be able to shoot close. With the 30 MOA base with the optic and the rifle that I had, I could not get the closer range 0 that I needed, so I had to drop back to a 20 MOA base on that.
Oh, interesting.
To be able to get the close in zeros that I would need for some of the targets that you have to engage with those. But it still gave me 20 MOA assistance at the long distance.
Okay. So when you say close in on that 22 match, are you talking like 100 yards or what's the distance?
I wanted to be able to have a 25 yards.
Oh, 25.
So, yep.
Okay.
With the 22 matches, it varies. So they use really small targets, and some of them are, in close. So I wanted to be able to have where I could dial to those and not have to do any hold unders for it.